two tigers in their living room.
Circus people are the best people.
Hello and welcome to the Hackaday podcast. I'm Elliot Williams.
I'm Dan Maloney.
This is episode 236. It's the car episode, plus we'll talk about building Leonardo's watermill and reviving RadioShack. Starting off in Hackaday prize news, we had the end of the wildcard round on Tuesday, and that means our judges are hard at work picking the 10 finalists. There is kind of a cooling down period where everybody who's been nominated as a finalist can put the finishing touches on their projects before we snapshot the whole darn thing and hand it off to our panel of celebrity final round judges. And then, of course, the big reveal in November, I think November 4th, maybe November 5th.
Fast approaching.
I can't believe how fast it's all coming along. It's an absolute train at this point. It's on the rails, but it's rolling. It's accelerating.
A rocket sled.
It might be a rocket sled. And in personal news, I pulled what I've taken to calling a Dan Maloney.
Don't blame me.
I do blame you. For at least for making me aware of the pattern. I had a project I needed, and it enabled me to buy some cool tools to go along with it.
You know, that's the whole point of the project. In my world, anyways.
It could be. Oh, this is such horrible project creep. I was at Chaos Communication Camp this year and with my family, and my son saw some of the people riding around on various modified hoverboard vehicles. And a number of years ago, we built one that was just kind of, a hoverboard screwed to a piece of wood with some casters on the front. And this time he decided he wanted it a little fancier. And so we were going to modify it into a bobby car, which is a little children's ride-on German car. I'll have to throw pictures, but he totally fell in love with that. And so we bought a hoverboard, and the thing, of course, has a dead battery. And that means 20 lithium-ion batteries, of which 4 need to be outright replaced and 6 look kind of dodgy. And so that means battery surgery. And that means I get to buy a battery spot welder. I totally just boom like that, impulse purchased. Not the bottom of the barrel spot welder. And in fact, I'll throw a link to Jenny List's review of the bottom of the barrel spot welder. That is one of the few reviews of hers where she buys something on spec from AliExpress or whatever and decides that it just wasn't worth the money at all. It's actually a piece of crap. And I went and bought the next model up, a kind of $50 spot welder model. And I have to say, I have not welded more than this one battery pack with it, but it was entirely flawless, uneventful, and freaking awesome.
I deem it satisfactory.
These things are battery powered and handheld. And so it's got a big lithium polymer battery inside it. And you're sitting here using the lithium polymer to weld together more lithium batteries. It's like lithium batteries all the way down. And the thing has, because why not at this point, it has a USB jack on it so that you can actually use it to recharge your cell phone or something. So in addition to being a battery welder, it's also a big honkin' power bank.
You could probably use it to jumpstart your car too in a pinch if you had the right cabling. It's just the sheer amount of charge that a battery like that can move.
It's crazy, huh?
And actually a little scary too. I mean, I'm very mindful of, when I'm working around even a car battery, make sure my wedding ring is nowhere near my finger. That's in the house somewhere safe. And I've seen too many of those, shorted across the wedding ring, injuries to a finger that I'm not going to risk that. It's terrible.
Yeah, this one is, it's 4 volts. It's spec'd at 1,000 amps. One time I didn't have the probes on very well, and it made sparks and shot metal across the room, and that was pretty amusing.
Yeah, it's pretty energetic.
It's definitely a lot of juice and real fast. I mean, it's got these big, I don't know what size cables on it, but they're pretty chunky, and they jump when it shoots, right? You put the things down. It waits a second and then it fires, making magnetic fields and pulling them together. That's pretty fun. Anyway, if I put together another battery pack with this thing, I think I will declare it satisfactory enough that I'll probably have to write up a review for Hackaday because it's actually really, really cool.
That's good because I need to do the same thing too. I've got all these batteries here that I've been meaning to put to some use, and I haven't ever made the leap because I don't have a spot welder, so I'm going to have to get one. And the nickel strips and this and that and the other thing too.
I learned in the search for this that a lot of the nickel strips aren't nickel anymore. They're steel and then nickel plated.
Nice.
And they have more resistance than the straight up nickel ones. So if you're going to do something that's really high current, you either want to derate it by using wider strips than you think, or just cough up and buy the nickel ones. And you can tell which ones are the nickel ones on Amazon because the price is factor of 2.
Wow, that much?
Yeah. It's a lot more expensive. No, we had fun. I got to show my son what's on the inside of a hoverboard, and we got to work on some of his battery stuff. It's a good project just to do, just for doing it, just to get your feet around building up battery packs and seeing what goes on in there.
It's kind of on the edge of, danger too. You're kind of building a bomb, if things go wrong, and that's the thing that's always gotten me about batteries. There's no way to turn them off past the terminals of the battery. They're either discharged completely, in which case they're probably dead, or there's still something on them. And, you can turn off a circuit breaker, you can pull a fuse, you can disconnect this and whatever. But at some point, there's a piece of metal sticking out that has a lot of juice on it. And making one mistake with a screwdriver or a wedding ring or whatever, then things get a little dicey.
I will admit that we saw a couple sparks while cutting this battery pack apart.
Yes.
There has to be a good way to do that safely. And if anyone out there knows how to cut apart like a hoverboard battery, 10 serial, 2 parallel battery, because they come in these ultra tight packed configurations. How do you get in there with a pair of scissors without shorting it every once in a while? You can let me know in the comments. All right, shall we roll on over to What's That Sound?
Sure enough.
This week, the sound idea is courtesy of Dan. So thanks very much, Dan. And everyone else out there, listen and enjoy. If you think you know what that is, head on over to hackaday.com/podcast. Fill in your best guess on the form, leave your handle and your email, and next week we will pick among the right answers, and lucky number, whatever the dice come up with, will get a Hackaday podcast t-shirt. And leading off the hacks this week, I wanted to start off with something kind of newsy. Your car is a privacy nightmare on wheels. Jenny picked this up. It's a study into what data automotive manufacturers are keeping on you by the Mozilla Foundation. And basically they look at 25 brands and are unhappy with each and every one of them. And that's kind of brutal. I guess I'll start with a quote from their report. The very worst offender is Nissan. The Japanese car manufacturer admits in their privacy policy to collecting a wide range of information, including sexual activity, health diagnosis data, and genetic data, but doesn't specify how. They share and sell this data, characteristics, psychological trends, predispositions, behavior, attitudes, intelligence, abilities, and aptitudes, end quote, to data brokers, law enforcement, and other third parties. Yikes! So whatever it is your car knows about you, they are selling it. And it looks like the market for this data is somewhere, well, analysts estimate that by 2030, the data will be worth $750 billion, which means right now it's probably $500 billion globally spread around the car manufacturers, taken from you and in the creepiest possible way. Boo. Boo.
The mind boggles. Where do you even go with this? I mean, I get how a car, a modern car, brand new, off the lot, full of sensors, full of, safety gear, all that stuff. I understand how it could collect information on things like your weight, your facial expressions. There's cameras looking to make sure your race. I mean, race is generally discernible from an image. So, I'm sure it's making some suppositions. But, say, you could probably make a pretty good guess of what your race is, your weight with a strain gauge in the seat, obviously. That actually is something that makes sense that needs to be recorded for pre-tensioning seatbelts and supplemental restraints and all that stuff. Your sexual activity, too. I mean, if someone's balling in the back seat, there's probably a sensor for that. Genetic information?
I have no
Immigration status? How in the living hell are they getting that from a car?
My guess is they know some of this data from, your lease terms or other stuff, and they're actually just pooling it all together. And that's part of the problem here, is that they're taking data from a bunch of different sources and lumping it all together.
Or are they casting a wide net and not actually collecting genetic data from you at this time, but we anticipate in some point in the future?
They're ready to do it in case, so they'll get you to sign off on it now.
Yeah, when we install the default breathalyzer that, or what do you call it? The ignition interlock, and you're inhaling into a tube. Well, perhaps we'll just, have some sort of, genetic analysis tool built into that to get your exhaled DNA. And they're just kind of covering their bases for the future. I don't know, but good Lord, stop this.
So we just bought a new car. Well, it's a used car, but it's new to us. It's a Škoda, which is a Czech company that got bought up by VW a little while ago. And it's actually an electric car. It's on the VW's electric car platform, which is kind of cool. It's actually a really great car. It has privacy settings in it. And so I looked all in this study to see if they looked at the Škodas, because I actually have two different privacy settings that I can do. One where it stops tracking location, and one where it stops sending back all telemetry except what is required by law. And so that seems to me like two pretty good slider switches to customize the level of privacy I want. And I wonder, I'd really love to see a third party analyze this in detail and figure out what the heck's going on. We've driven it around in total private mode, incognito mode, with both of those switches switched off, actually most of the time. And, it's like driving a car. It's no problem. It's not like you miss anything. But I do wonder what the telemetry that they're required to send by law is. Maybe some of the accident data, maybe if like the airbags go off, it has to be able to phone home.
Yeah, I don't know what the laws are like over there. I don't know what the laws are like over here either. And my most recent vehicle is a 2004.
So
Toyota.
You're good.
So I'm good as far as I know. And I can't imagine the amount of work that I'd have to do on a new or even new-ish vehicle before I would feel comfortable putting it on the road. With a pair of wire snips going, and I was like, nope, not that. And just cut a bunch of crap out and, just see if it runs. If it does, great. Okay. Just keep, I don't want it. And I'm not a Luddite by any means. I know there's a price to be paid for this safety and security and convenience of having your phone be able to sync up to your infotainment system. That comes at a price. And I don't know if I'm willing to pay that price. I'm certainly not yet. I'm going to probably have to cross this bridge at some point. I can only keep these cars alive so long.
I think it's really great for Mozilla to be making this sort of information available to people. This is the kind of thing that a lot of people didn't know was happening to them. And, somehow, even in 2023, we still get people who are surprised by the fact that a pixel in a website they load is tracking their every move. And I don't know how that's the case. But, I wouldn't have expected it from cars, frankly. Anyway, give the article a read. See how badly you're being spied on by your cars. Tell your friends. Hopefully, we can make enough hubbub about this that they'll stop doing it. And if hubbub isn't enough, go get some laws made.
Oh, yeah, it's that easy. Well, on a related note, and also by Jenny List, who apparently is on this particular hobby horse of over-engineered motor vehicles, when taillights lose touch with reality. Again, the mind boggles. Brand new. This is by Ford Tech, Make You Loco, who is a Ford, automotive technician, aka a mechanic. Got a basically brand new. I think he said it was a 2018 Ford F-150 or F-250, with all the bells and whistles. Rolled into the shop, not working, various complaints that sort of accumulated over time from the customer. Finally accumulated to the point where the thing wouldn't run. Does his diagnosis. There's a little bit about the diagnosis in the video that accompanies the article that Jenny wrote. It comes up to be a CAN bus problem on the medium speed CAN bus, and traced it back to the tail light on the truck. Basically what happened is some water got in, did some corrosion, did its usual thing where it turns the copper wires into green pus, knocks out a connection that knocked out the CAN bus and killed the car. The first question is, why in the world is there a CAN bus connection to the tail light? It is a literal light inside of a plastic lens. That tail light, because the owner of this vehicle bought the super duper version of the truck, was equipped with all manner of sensors. I think he mentioned there was a LiDAR sensor or an optical scanner of some sort. I gathered it was for like lane excursions, the thing that tells you whether you're driving in somebody else's lane. Probably some sort of backup sensors. The lamps themselves were not the usual, twisted in and you've got a little tungsten bulb or halogen bulb or something like that. No, those are LEDs. They're sealed. No way to replace them. And basically the whole thing ended up being this ridiculous cascade of part after part after part that was needed to be replaced. Labor, diagnosis time, all shop time, everything else out the door. $5,600 to replace a taillight and get this car back on the road. Again, the mind boggles. Something as simple as a broken taillight would sideline a vehicle and cost $5,600 to get it back on the road. As far as I can see, this can't really be a case of poor engineering, incompetent engineering. No engineer is that incompetent. No engineer could possibly have gotten far enough in life to get to the point where they're designing vehicles for Ford Motor Company and not realize that a bad CAN bus connection in a module that lives inside of a taillight is a bad idea because it could potentially sideline the whole vehicle. There's something there that's more than incompetence. This feels malicious, not incompetent.
I'll be devil's advocate on this if you want.
Okay. Absolutely.
I think part of the reason that they put all the sensors and everything into these little bolt-on taillight modules is that that's then stuff they don't have to build into the body of the car. And so I think it reduces complexity of the build so much that there's a tremendous incentive for them to, put the backup sensors and all of that into the same thing as the lights because hell, it's all in the CAN bus anyway, right? At that point, you kind of want it to all be in one unit. And of course, that does make one point of failure. But part of the real story here anyway is that this thing was taking on water and they filled up instead of draining. And this is the part which does make you wonder a little bit. This is one of these lessons I learned as a kid. There was a strange hole under the spare tire of my car. And I was like, that's weird. And I plugged it up with I made a little rubber plug and plugged it up as a 17-year-old me. There I fixed it. And months later, there was gallons and gallons of water in the spare tire well in the back of my car. And I popped the plug out. And of course, it was at the low point and all that water drained out. And I'm like, oh, that's why that hole was there. That was a hole on purpose.
It was a finely engineered hole.
I think it was. I think it was entirely there on purpose. So, yeah, boo me for plugging up the drain hole and boo Ford for not designing drain holes into these, tail light apparatuses.
I understand the need, or at least the imperative, for censoring your car. It used to be that, you had your rearview mirrors and you had your WITs to keep you safe on the road. And now you've got, rear-facing sensors, backup cameras, side-facing sensors, lane deviation, anti-lock brakes, traction control, blah, 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 all this stuff. And absolutely, that stuff has made experience of a motor vehicle accident much more survivable. One of the reasons I would like to get a newer car is because of those capabilities that keep you safe. You know, the car does its job in an accident and keeps you alive in most cases. But, you know, this long chain of cascading failures that's just going to end up costing you big bucks down the road or costing you privacy, like we talked about in the last one. Yeah, at some point, I don't know. I mean, diminishing returns on investment or something. I don't know. I don't know where the line is. I guess you only really know where the line is after you pass it.
All right, my next hack comes from Germany, actually. Circus Roncalli is a circus here that has been, for 20 years now, traveling around without animals, which is a weird thing in Germany. German circuses are super traditional, and a lot of them are still like literally traveling circuses. They'll stay put over the winter and then they'll travel around all summer. And if you're a circus that has a bunch of animals, this means packing the animals up in wagons and setting them up in temporary pens in whatever city you end up in. And all of this is probably tantamount to animal cruelty at the end of the day. And at least that's what the people running Roncalli decided. And they actually let all of their animals kind of die of natural causes and slowly expired them out of the circus because there's nowhere else to give them to either. You know, what do you do with a circus elephant? So
eBay.
Yeah, right? But they kind of wanted to get some of the animal flavor back in. So they've turned to using a funny, quote, hologram animal act, which is really interesting. And of course, it's not a hologram. And I love that Maya is like, but actually, and points this out. And the way they do it's really cool. They actually have a black kind of, think about mosquito netting scrim that comes down when the lights are out. And then they project on this. And so it gives you the illusion of depth. And, you know, of course, they're going to do all the 3D things. They're going to have the elephants run out at you and goofy stuff like that, right? But volumetric displays are really, really neat. And I wish we could see more about the technology behind this. I maybe have to see if I can dig into it a little more. But you can read the article that's linked to in the show notes here. I guess I wanted to pick this up because I just think volumetric displays are just so damn neat. And I want to talk about a couple other ones.
I will stipulate that I'm not a big fan of animal abuse. I'll go out on a limb here and say that. And if you abuse animals, you're a garbage person. On the other hand, the experience of being close to something that big and powerful and unpredictable, if it's a lion, I mean, even an elephant is certainly unpredictable, but, you know, lions and tigers and bears, oh my, is pretty powerful. And I can remember being maybe 4 or 5 years old, really, really young. Parents get me up in the middle of the night, me and my brother, and took us down to see where they were setting up the Cole Beatty Circus on this, you know, big fairgrounds kind of place. And they were actually using the elephants from the show to set up the tent. Like these were the beast of burden. They put ropes on them and hauled up the poles and the tents, the big heavy canvas. It was unbelievable to see that. And my parents were like, you know, it's like 3, 4 in the morning when they get us up to go see this. When are they ever going to be able to see this again was like what my parents were thinking. You know, they'll never be able to see this again. They're not doing this anymore anywhere. And so they gave us this really cool experience. I don't know that, you know, what the elephants thought about it at the time. You know, are they thinking, you know, they're slaves? Are they thinking they're being abused? Are they happy with their work? I don't know. I don't know what the situation was with them, but with me, it was, you know, something to see. And this is an interesting technology that sort of captures the presence of animals in a way that's a whole lot less potentially cruel. So I get that and I like that, but it's something missing from it. And it's too bad that we can't just all get along and everybody can treat animals the way they should be treated and give them, you know, the respect that they deserve, especially elephants, right? Those animals are not that far away from us in, you know, emotional development and all that stuff. And seeing animals abused. So this is, I guess, what needs to happen now.
It's really hard because it was done circus animals for generations and generations. And I actually have some insight into this. I'll come out of the closet. My wife's family ran a long 400-year tradition circus in Germany, and her grandfather said, that's it. The circus ends with me because we can't keep doing this. And what's funny is the circus people, of course, they live with the animals. They all love the animals. But then they also have to be like loading the giraffe into the truck, where the giraffe has to be driven long distances with his head bent over, and it's not good for a giraffe. The bit with the elephants, they need so much more space than they get, when they're being kept in a lot in a city, wherever you end up, right? I actually know from the inside that the people running these circuses were really torn by it. I really didn't want to focus on this. I wanted to talk about projections.
You wanted to go with volumetric displays, yeah.
My God, I wanted to talk volumetric displays. So let's talk volumetric displays a little bit. This was too much circus stuff. There's a whole bunch of really cool ways to kind of convey 3D without actually making holograms. And these volumetric displays are super. I think the most recent one we've seen that really struck me was an OLED display where Sean Hodgkins had a bunch of clear OLED displays and kind of stacked them up. So it's basically an OLED take on the, LED cube or something like that. And it looks really cool. It's got much more resolution in the horizontal direction than in the depth dimension, but it's still pretty awesome. There's a whole lot of fun ways to do it. The Roncalli folks are doing it with screens. One way we've seen a lot of hackers tackle is to make something spin like a helix and then project down on it from above. And you time the projection with the spinning of the helix so that it reflects out at the viewer exactly when it should. And so you can kind of project in a cylinder in space. And that's kind of fun. I'll throw a link for one of those in the show notes. We actually covered 5 or 6 of those. The coolest I've ever seen in person, and this is one I don't know if a lot of people know about, was wire map, and Lumarca was a derivative of that. And this was really cool because of its incredible simplicity. Wire map was really just a bunch of strings aligned so that they line up with the pixel columns in a projector when you project at them. So you have to imagine kind of like a forest of a bunch of vertical strings, and each one of them is a vertical pixel strip on a projector. And so you map the 3D image, onto the projector so that each string lights up, but they also are offset by depth, right? So, if a neighboring string might be further behind or further ahead. And so you have to do the math to make the pixels line up accordingly. And I actually got a chance to see wire map in person, and it's absolutely enchanting. It's crazy low resolution in a way because you're only seeing, there's only so tight you can pack the strings in there. But it's a really, really great effect. And I guess there are precision requirements in where you put the strings. But these days, there has to be a really clever projection mapping way to figure out where all the strings are as well. This is one of those technologies I want to see someone pick up on, take over, and do something super, super cool with. Also, might be good for a Halloween haunt.
Probably something that looks better in person than it does on a video, right?
Of course. Yeah, and because you can walk around it, it's I guess on the very back, you're blinded by the projector. But like if you walk, 180 degrees around the thing, you get the perspective on it. It's really, really fantastic.
My next choice is one that kind of confused me at first. The title is Tape is Very, Very Quiet. And I thought when I read the title, well, yeah, of course it is. If you turn on the CRO2 switch and you put the Dolby on, tape can be nice and quiet. Oh, no, it's not that kind of tape. It's sticky kind of tape that Action Lab evaluated a sample of particular type of tape made by 3M known as constrained layer damping tape. Now, of course, this comes from 3M. That company makes a bewildering variety of products, tapes being probably the best known, Scotch tape and stuff like that. They make an amazing amount of stuff. They really put some engineering into this stuff. The demo kind of tells the whole tale. There's 2 symbols. One of the symbols is just native raw control, whatever, and the other one has a very small piece of tape on the back of it. It looks like about the width of a roll of duct tape, and it's a couple inches long, and it's stuck to the back of it. Take the mallet, gong the regular cymbal, and you get a good sound. And the other one, it's just this dull clunk. Absolutely no resonance at all. Turns the cymbals around, and lo and behold, it's the tape that did it. This constrained layer damping is pretty clever. Basically, what it does is make a large surface, a large resonant surface like a cymbal, or in the demo that he does later in the video, a large cookie sheet. Something that would resonate pretty resoundingly when you tap it, and turn that into kind of a composite material with a layer of this constrained layer damping tape on it. Constrained layer damping tape is basically a layer of viscoelastic goo, that's the actual tape, backed by a more rigid but still pretty thin layer of, in this case, metal. It's basically a metal tape. And what happens is that viscoelastic material absorbs some of the energy of the vibration of the surface that you've applied it to, and transfers it into that rigid layer that's on the tape, and deadens the vibrations. It absorbs those vibrations, takes the energy away from it, and turns this cymbal or this surface, whatever it is, into a much less efficient resonator. This stuff's very expensive. I think he said it was like $200 for a roll. So it's not something you can just kind of play around with that much, but he did a fairly good job at imitating the effect with just a regular layer of double-sided carpet tape. Not even that foamy stuff, but the thin stuff that you'd actually put down on the floor to hold down a piece of carpet. Peeled the backing off of that, and then applied a thin piece of aluminum. And that deadened the vibrations coming out of a cookie sheet by, a factor of 50 or something like that. So it's kind of interesting that there's this material out there that basically turns another surface into a composite with different properties from the original surface. This little demo itself is pretty interesting, and something that might be worth giving a try in a situation where you need to have some sound deadening in one of your projects.
You can buy this kind of squishy viscoelastic stuff as a normal double-sided mounting tape in rolls. And I wonder if you use that instead of something super thin like he used, if you could actually do, just as well as the real stuff. What is that stuff called? That crazy...
I don't know. I think I know what you mean, though. It's
the hallmark of it, as far as I'm concerned, is when you need to peel it off the wall. If you peel straight back, it doesn't come off. But if you peel sideways, it expands. It pulls thin, and it gives...
Yeah, the command strips.
Command strips is exactly. I wonder if you couldn't get that sort of material and then put aluminum over the top on that, because that stuff...
I'd be surprised if the constraint or the viscoelastic layer in this tape wasn't that stuff.
Exactly.
Because
I think it's probably exactly that stuff.
Especially given the amount that you have to pay for command strips and command hooks and stuff like that. I mean, bought some from my dad's place, and it was like $10 for 3 hooks.
Oof.
And a couple of extra pieces of adhesive.
The brand name that I'm thinking of for stuff here in Europe is called PowerZip, and it's I'll put a link in the show notes. It's awesome stuff. It's expensive, but it's not outrageously expensive, and you can buy it. I'm looking at a strip now so it's about 3/4 of an inch wide and 1.5 meters long. So combine that with a little aluminum flashing tape, and you're set.
When they send things in the mail, like if they want to send you like a fake credit card or something like that, and you get this little lump of snot that, and those things are great. You ball that stuff up and you throw it at your kid and get it in their hair, and your mother yells at you.
It's no good that's, confined to industry uses. We should all have snotty tape on our own. Oh, this is the worst title of this week. My next hack is Thomas Sandlander's YouTube channel goes in the toilet. And that is meant to be a joke. He actually has a broken small plastic part on the inside of his toilet. And the question here is, how is the best way to make a replacement part? Should he model it using CAD program, or should he scan it using a couple handheld 3D scanners and then use the resulting part to 3D print a replacement? And it's actually a really neat look into the scanning technology. And I'm pretty comfortable with CAD design, but not as good with 3D scanners. I've only played around with them once in my whole life. Oh my God, on his desk, he's got a roll of that same viscoelastic gummy tape.
Oh, yeah.
I'm looking at it right now in the picture. That's funny as all heck. Anyway, so this is a video about, kind of when you want to do your own CAD and when you want to do 3D scanning. And it's really neat because it ends up being about the same amount of time one way or the other. He uses one scanner that's just totally inappropriate and ends up throwing it away. Another scanner gives him a really good scan, but it's got all these kind of millimeter level blobbies on it. And when he prints the part out, it works. So, no problem there. But, he had to fix it in Mesh Mixer, and he had to do this and that and the other to get it to, to get the point cloud into a printable object. And even then it looked kind of sketchy, but he got it working. He's pretty good at CAD and whips up a CAD model in about the same time. I think, honestly, the whole speed comparison here is kind of not the point. He makes a big deal about doing the timer. If you had to learn CAD from the beginning to do this part, you'd have hours and hours of work ahead of you. So, that's not very fair. On the other hand, if you wanted to make the 3D scanned part look as good and exactly like it as the CAD modeled part does, well, you'd have so much work to do there. So I think the timing comparison's kind of a red herring here. Oh, yeah, but in the end, what happens is he discovers that this piece is actually missing a part. Of course, you can't do a scan of a part of the piece that's missing. So he's just done there. Anyway, he manages to graft on a small cylinder to this piece that was missing because the part was broken. Of course, in CAD, you just pull the cylinder out and boom, you're done, 10 seconds. So that's one of the differences, is if you're making something that you can't put on your desktop already, there's just no way to scan it. So you're done. If you want to make something imaginary, from your own head, you're basically stuck with CAD or carving it out of wood and then doing a scan of that or something crazy like that. So I think that's one of the real strengths of CAD, is that if you're doing the design on your own from a blueprint or from your head, or you're designing something new that doesn't exist yet, CAD's your only way. When he looks at the 3D scan, he also decides that it was easier in some ways and harder in others. It's kind of multimodal. Doing the scan is easy. You just use the machine, but then you have to fix up the mesh. So you have to kind of know something about those tools. And then when you have to tweak it and slice it, and then when he adds to add another part, he's using all these different tools. And it's not just the scanner anymore, but it's a whole long tool chain. And so that's more stuff he has to learn there. So that kind of offsets maybe the CAD skill. I don't know. I think honestly, if you're doing this, you probably want all of them. And that's his conclusion in the end, is he points out, a YouTuber who makes replacement parts for cars, who makes really good use of the 3D scanner by scanning the whole environment that he needs to put the part into, and then CADing the part around this 3D model. And that's one of the things I think is the biggest strong suit of 3D scanning.
This is from How to Make Everything, the YouTube channel where, he tries to make everything, learn how to make everything. And so being a Renaissance man, he turned to the original Renaissance man, Leonardo da Vinci, for his design for a water-powered sawmill that was basically little more than a sketch that Leonardo made in the 1470s in one of his notebooks. When Leonardo da Vinci makes a sketch, it's not just a sketch. It was pretty detailed blueprints for what he thought a water-powered sawmill would look like. Leonardo's idea was very simple: a water wheel to provide the power, a crank to run a saw blade up and down, and then a ratchet mechanism that was powered by the motion of the wheel that drove the log forward into the blade, so keeping that pressure up on it. And just a little while later, hopefully just a little while later, you've got a board out of a log. Actually making that happen. It's important to note here that as much of a genius as Leonardo da Vinci was, he was an idea man, not a I'm going to go build it man, for the most part, from what we can tell. He did a lot of drawings, but he didn't actually embody these things. He left that up to other people. So the details in something like this are where the real problems mount up. All of this stuff has to be made out of wood, obviously, and that wood would have been milled by hand, cut by hand. Apprentices would have been available to do the less complicated parts, but the manually intensive parts, like planing and ripping down logs into lumber. But anyways, this whole structure needed to be made, and you can only make so many concessions to completely handmade. How to make everything has to advance videos like this along in projects like this. He needs to make some concessions, and you got to go and shop for your lumber at some point. And I think in some ways that's part of the problem here. He's not using the kinds of woods that a medieval millwright would have used to build a water wheel or a sawmill like this. Probably would have been, something like oak, much stronger wood than what looks like Douglas fir and spruce for the most part, and standard dimensional lumber that you can get at Home Depot. So there's some, I guess I'd call it, compliance problems with the structure. At one point in the video, you can see him kind of wiggling around on the foundation for this thing, and this thing's racking and going all over the place. And that's not going to help, because that's going to be compliance that you have to get over when you're trying to run this mechanism. Everything's going to be wobbly. You're going to be fighting. The structure itself is going to be fighting what you're trying to do. The other problem that I noticed, the saw blade that he uses for this sawmill is one that he made himself in a previous episode. And basically all the blacksmithing techniques, the usual stuff, you hammer out a piece of metal, make it real thin, use a triangular file and cut some teeth in it, and you've got yourself a saw blade. As far as I can tell, he didn't put a set to the teeth, and the teeth don't look that sharp themselves. There were some problems with the water supply too. I mean, he didn't have a handy stream or mill race to provide all the water you need for to really turn a water wheel at the speeds and the torque. So he's simulating it with a pump, and the pump burned out and got clogged with trash. So there were problems and all that. And some people in the comments were being ridiculous about picking apart stuff like that. And to me, that's not the point of something like this. The point of something like this is, like I said, Da Vinci didn't embody a lot of his inventions. He just envisioned them and left it up to other people. And I think hats off to How to Make Everything for even trying this. It's a big project that took a bunch of people a long time to come up with. And yeah, okay, it didn't work. It didn't, just zoom through a piece of wood and, and then you've got boards. Okay, it didn't work in that way. But if 300 years ago, 400 years ago, whatever, he had built something like this, and this was the first result that he had, this would be really encouraging. This would be like, this is way better than being the guy at the bottom of the pit with a pit saw and getting covered with sawdust and all that stuff. I would look at this as a little bit on the magic side. If I were a medieval villager who had only known how to make boards the manual way, yeah, there was a lot of room for improvement, but that's what we did. We started someplace and said, okay, here's what worked about it. Here's what didn't work about it. Here's where we're going next. So I think the people who are kind of criticizing it in the comments are a little off base and missing the point of something like this. Still was he termed it a success. And I think I agree with that. Could be better, but that's the point. It'll be better next time.
All right, my first quick hack this week comes from Alan Pope. It is a virus for the BBC Micro. I love this. I was thinking, one of the great things about retro computing is that the computers are simple enough that you can really understand them. What we need is now retrovirus writing. So go to it, people. I think this is the beginning of a great new study. Next up, building a cargo bike dream. This is a cargo loader bike by Paul Vandelay. He's built a really simple one before. This is him building it with all the features he would want, which means it's insanely complex. This first video just lays the bike out for you. It's got cable steering, got a motor, and the battery is well integrated into the frame and stuff. But really here it's just the story about how he builds it and the jigs he sets up and all of the kind of welding and design work. It's really, really great. But throughout the video, he's like telling you about things he's going to cover in future videos. And I dare you to watch this without wanting to watch the next ones. I'll be keeping my eye out. And last up, feedback loop, putting the magic smoke back into a dodgy spectrum analyzer. This is a repair hack to beat all repair hacks. He's got a Rigol scope with this like big lump of charcoal in it. And the question is, if you are looking at the charcoal and want to replace it with actual components, where do you even start? And that's kind of how this story goes. Anyway, in the end, of course, it is RF switches and pin diodes. He ends up buying new ones, replacing them all, and boom, Rigol Spectrum Analyzer back on its legs.
Okay, first up for me, how small can the ESP32 get? Well, not much bigger than the ESP32C3 chip itself, apparently. If Paul is any indication, he has made the minimal ESP32 development board that issues such niceties as the Wi-Fi and GPIO, which kind of makes it useless for some people, but not for a lot of cases. There's things you can do, plenty of things you can do with a chip like this, and it's really not a whole lot bigger than a micro SD card. Next up, Clock Hack gives Deck Rainbow a new lease on life. This is the Deck Rainbow 100B that Dr. Joshua Reichert had. That was DOA. This is a strange beast that has both Z80 and 8088 processors in it and could be used as a terminal or a CPM machine or an MS-DOS machine. It had a whole bunch of different lives, but when he got it, it didn't have any life at all. And it ended up being because the 24 megahertz oscillator in it was kaput. And to get the thing on its feet and basically make some progress, he used an Arduino and an SI5351 clock generator to cobble together a temporary clock, which basically amounts to a implantable pacemaker for the machine, and got it back on its feet until he could get a legit oscillator for it. Last up, speaking of strange computers, the computer that controlled Chernobyl. This one comes to us from Chernobyl Family, who has a great 20-ish minute video looking over the Scala system that was in place in the Chernobyl plant back when it, Chernobyled in 1986. But prior to that, it was run by quite an impressive bit of hardware. The look of these machines is just unparalleled. It's gorgeous old machinery that deserves to be in a museum, and through some of the efforts of the Chernobyl family themselves, the machines were preserved and put aside for display, and it's kind of a treasure to see what went into controlling the reactor way back when.
That brings us to our Can't Miss articles. These are long-form pieces written by our fantastic Hackaday writing staff. This week I picked Al Williams's Will RadioShack Return? This is speculation based on the fact that a company that actually spun off of old RadioShack, the El Salvador-based Unicomer Group, has decided to take the brand name and open up stores with it in the US again. We'll see what happens. I'm not 100% convinced, but just the prospect of opening up another brick and mortar electronics store chain in America has gotten everyone frothing at the bit. And if you read through the comments, tons of people are both speculating about whether it is possible or just riffing on what kind of things they could do to be successful. I mean, I think somehow in all of our souls, we all want electronic stores to go to because we want to go around and, browse through the resistor aisle for some reason. But I don't think that's as mainstream a desire as I wish it were. I mean, I think that's what killed RadioShack in the end, was that, a lot of what they were selling wasn't what was taking up most of their floor space. And that's probably what killed them from an economics perspective. But there are a ton of great ideas about what kind of business models you could do. I think the one that strikes me as the most interesting is realizing that one of the things that RadioShack did best was kind of take an educational role. And like you could buy books about how to put together electronic kits, and then you could buy the parts you needed to do it. And if you were super lucky, one of the people behind the counter actually knew something about any of that too, and you could ask them about it. And I think pushing that forward and kind of going into maybe a, more educational, more kind of, makery friendly sort of thing could totally work, I hope, in my dream world of the future. Don't count on it.
Yeah, mixed feelings on RadioShack coming back, I think. It was a big part of my life for quite a few years when I was 10, 12 years old. I would go into RadioShack, and I didn't have any money, but like my mom would be shopping in the grocery store next door, and she'd just like, get out of here. And I'd go into the RadioShack, and there were times when I actually just sat down on the carpet in front of the parts and just looked at them and sort of, dreamed about what I'd do if I could actually, afford to buy the TO3 package, big regulator or transistor, or boy, I'd really love to, be able to afford some capacitors.
Right.
And the guys in the store were very indulgent of me, especially when, it finally came around time for the TRS-80 to come out, and, some things they'd actually let me go in there and peck out some basic programs. And, it was my first real computer time. I always thought I would, my first job would be in RadioShack. It never worked out that way. There was never one around by the time I got into high school, and not particularly interested in putting a clip-on tie on and standing behind the counter and asking everybody for their address, which for some reason RadioShack seemed to really want to have. I don't know. I think in some ways for me, RadioShack is something from my past that I don't necessarily need to see again. But then again, it was really, really helpful to have it around. I mean, even as late as 7 or 8 years ago, I think, I was probably stopping at RadioShack pretty regularly to pick up a connector or a jack or a switch or something like that from the parts section that had shrunk from the entire back of the store with those perf board racks that, they had back there, to the little parts cabinet that was sort of an island in the center of the store, which was probably more space efficient, but certainly wasn't anywhere near as much fun as having it all laid out before you, and you could go, oh, here's the resistors, oh, here's the capacitors, oh, here's the cool semiconductors.
I do think there's something to be said for being able to go into the place and physically see the parts. That's totally different from, even this incredible availability we have now. Like, you go to DigiKey or you go to any one of the like auction sites or Alibaba or whatever, you can get everything imaginable and get it shipped to you cheap. But it somehow isn't the same as going into the store and like looking at the parts. And that's such a weird thing, because there's nothing about seeing a transistor that's different from looking at its data sheet. There really isn't.
Right.
But yet there is. And I wish I could explain that. And there's going to be a whole generation of kids out there who's like, that crazy old dude. And I'm totally fine with that. You're probably right. But we were talking about this the other day with my wife and son, actually, because she has been getting a little more into electronic stuff, and I've been encouraging it, and it's really awesome. And she's like, hey, is there an electronics store around here? And I'm like, yeah, there is, actually. We're lucky enough to have Conrad, which is kind of Germany's RadioShack, except their components section is all in a you ask the guy to go get the stuff for you zone. So it's not like RadioShack where they just had trays of things you could pull at and look. It's somehow less rewarding, even though you can walk over to Conrad and say, I need a tip 127 transistor, and he'll go fetch you one right then and there. It's still not the same as being able to just browse through rows and rows of electronics. I understand it. It's so much more space efficient. It's like, it's the only way they can run the shop, and I'm stoked that they do. But,
I've had both experiences in my life in that formative time when I was first getting into electronics. The RadioShack experience with the individual blister-packed transistors and stuff like that, which, there was a certain advantage to having at least the basic information from the from the data sheet, like right on the back of the card. I will say that was
Yeah,
important.
Yeah.
But there was also Bond Radio or Hatchery Electronics, which was, the big electronic supplier who was, in town. It was a city kind of place, so it could support that sort of thing. And it was exactly what you said. It was, you go there, and it was kind of like going into an auto parts store. Now, same thing. I need a flyback transformer for a Zenith, blah blah blah, whatever. And they would have it, and they would go get it. It was more of I guess a professional experience. If you felt like you were actually in the business, which I obviously was, because I had just driven a company car over there to go get the parts, and both have value. But I do miss being able to browse. For some reason, that just kind of stimulated your imagination, and like, ooh, what I could do with that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. Like, the other experience is kind of super efficient, but not very inspiring. And I think it is. I think you hit on it just now. It's the inspiration factor. It's the, you walk in there and you flip through the Forrest Mims book and you're like, oh, this is a really awesome circuit. And you have to imagine this is back in an information scarce time when, even the ideas, just a book of ideas about crazy electronic stuff you could make was powerful enough. And then there were the parts there. And like you say, you could look at the back of it where it gives you the specs just straight up. You don't have to go look at a data sheet. Everything's kind of instantaneous and just like full of ideas and possibility and stuff. And I think that was really kind of special about the brick and mortar store. And now that I think about that as being the part about RadioShack that I miss, I think about like something like Hackaday or something like our modern internet, where everyone's sharing awesome projects all the time. There's just no shortage of inspiration whatsoever. And that part's really easy. And then it's also easy to get the parts too if you need to. So, I'm not going to complain. I think we're in a good world right now. Yeah, but I wonder if it is possible then to recreate a brick and mortar store where you have that kind of inspiration/education aspect to it, or whether there's just no need for it anymore. And I think that's kind of the open question, and maybe we'll get to see.
I mean, it occurs to me that we're kind of victims of our own success in some ways. Us collectively as a generation, perhaps, to go on and, do things like invent the internet, which then made places like RadioShack obsolete
Killed
in some
RadioShack.
ways. So we did it to ourselves. We have no one to blame but ourselves.
Hackaday killed RadioShack. No.
Yeah, let's take that out of context. My pick for Can't Miss this week is Road Salt Bah! New roadway material promises a better solution to snow and ice by Lou and Day. I have a long, sad history with road salt. As I mentioned, I grew up in New England, a place that eats cars and infrastructure for dinner all winter long, every winter. I also spent a good amount of time in upstate New York when I was in grad school, and had the misfortune of having my truck, the aforementioned 86 Toyota truck, which had a little bit of a rust problem on it by the time I took it up there. By the time I left, it had no more rust problem because it had no more body. It had completely disappeared in the drenching of road salt that Monroe County, New York puts on the roads, partially because they own a salt mine. So it's free and it is plentiful. It is all over the place. And it was really the only game in town for fighting off the lake effect snows that would come off of Lake Ontario. And by the end of, like I said, by the end of 3 years, my truck was basically gone. But it doesn't have to necessarily be that way. There are other solutions that you can place on a road. First of all, you can just not salt a road. Well, I guess zeroth of all, you can not live in a place that has snow. If you do happen to live someplace where there's snow and ice, like I do now in North Idaho, we don't actually use a lot of salt on the roads after the fact. We do pre-treat the roads with a calcium chloride, I believe, solution. When they know a snowstorm is coming along, they spray the road with this stuff. It's basically, evaporates or dries or freeze. Well, I guess it wouldn't freeze. It dries very quickly. The water evaporates off and the salt stays with the road. And when it snows, the solution gets rehydrated and lowers the freezing point, and you basically end up with snow-free roads, at least for a while. And this article kind of goes into the next logical step of that, spraying the solution onto the road and incorporates it into the road. It's not a calcium salt, it's an acetate. So basically sodium acetate, which if you are a fan of salt and vinegar potato chips, smells exactly like salt and vinegar potato chips, built into the road along with some polymer adjuvants, I guess you would call it. Basically, you're encapsulating the salt solution into these little microspheres, which partially dissolve and are incorporated into the asphalt at the time it's laid down. Later on, when the road gets wet with snow and ice, the microcapsules release a certain amount of the sodium acetate that depresses the freezing point of the water that's falling on the road and melts the snow. It's a good idea. It seems like it works from what we see in the paper that accompanies this. There's an A/B test where you've got asphalt that's been treated by this stuff and asphalt that hasn't. And, obviously the roadway is completely free of snow and ice in the treated pavement. And then in the untreated pavement, it's completely covered. It's supposed to last 7 or 8 years before the salt is depleted. I don't see a way of regenerating it in any way, which seems to be a disadvantage. But then again, getting 7 or 8 years of not having to dump literal tons of salt and sand onto pavement, it buys you something. I don't know that it's 7 or 8 years is worth the extra cost. Some of the comments were talking about sodium acetate having been explored before as an alternative to chloride-based salts. It works just fine. It's been around for years. It's just much more expensive than owning a salt mine is for Monroe County, New York, and many other municipalities who can just stockpile salt as in gigatons. So whether this goes anywhere or not is an open question, but it is interesting research. And at the front of the article, we're talking about, roadways that de-ice themselves. The first thing I think about is solar freaking roadways.
Right.
But this is not that at all. It maybe has a little bit of a vibe like that because it is just research at this point, and everybody's got something to sell, but this one seems to be a little bit more on the level than roadways that de-ice themselves with solar energy and heaters.
That about wraps it up for the Hackaday podcast. Thanks very much for listening. If you want to follow the links, head on over to hackaday.com/podcast. And if you see anything cool or do anything cool, drop us a tip, tips@hackaday.com. And until next week,
keep on hacking.
That's my idea.
Oh, sweet.
Because I might have to edit it out. Total disaffected 8-year-old kid look on her face, except she's, literally got tigers on the couch. And I'm like, what the?
I'm here.
You're all digitized to me.
I hear you just fine.
All right. It is. One more time. Stretch. Dance.
My pick for must